Welcome to another episode of This Is Why I Don't Vote, a podcast. Season 2, Episode 36. Your safe space to discuss sports, politics, social issues, and even religion. Where we will take it all very seriously, but not too seriously. On this week's slate, I actually explore my evolving relationship with that delicious, nutritious alcohol. I examine my musical tastes, the electronic dance music, and the sense of community. The sense of community that we all feel, we all experience when listening to music. Dan Snyder is in fact an evil genius, and I let my ego step up and the fanboy come out. A little hoorah for the University of Tennessee football team. Thank you all for listening. I really do appreciate it. Please give the podcast likes, thumbs up, reviews, spread it far and wide. This Is Why I Don't Vote podcast is on Patreon. If you like what you hear, please consider supporting. And we are off.
Act 1. My evolving relationship with alcohol.
What's your drink? What do you have? What's your drink of choice? Over the course of the years, I've heard this from business contemporaries, from friends, work colleagues, particularly on dates, particularly on a first date. An easy get-to-know-you type question, what's your spirit of choice? For my part, I've always said the same thing. I do not discriminate against alcohols. Dating back to my days in high school, I would go to parties, and they would brag about the fact that they had gotten a keg of beer. What a big deal when you are between the ages of 16 and 19. And what was the keg of choice for many a consumer, an underage consumer of the alcohols, of the spirits? When I was in high school, Milwaukee's Best Light. That's right, dear listener, not Milwaukee's Best, which is, in fact, not Milwaukee's Best at all, but Milwaukee's Best Light. For anyone with any discriminating tastes, it literally offends the palate. All you have to do is smell it, and you will be disgusted. One of the greatest allies that I had in my sobriety during my high school years was the fact that many of the contemporaries that I had at the time had no reservations whatsoever about drinking Milwaukee's Best Light, particularly from a keg. Alcohol as a pursuit is, of course, to intoxicate you. Yet I've always liked the taste of alcohol, and thusly, I could not drink Milwaukee's Best Light. I have routinely excused myself from parties, particularly when I was in high school, because the choice of alcohols was so disdainful that I did not want to stay. You don't want to be the only sober person at a party where everyone else is drinking to the point of intoxication, and the smell of that intoxicant disgusts you. As an older man now, I am not getting the type of cooperation from my body to appreciate, as I do in my mind, as I do with my taste buds, as I do with my olfactory glands, the kind of appreciation for alcohol that I'm accustomed to. That's a sophisticated way of saying my stomach, my digestive system, does not like the alcohols anymore. I was recently discussing this with a friend of mine, and what was interesting about that conversation was I liked to attribute this change in my body's physiatry, in its chemistry, to my ayahuasca journey in Costa Rica last year. I went and sat with ayahuasca. I have this new spiritual awakening. I have this enlightenment, and my body is no longer accepting, the better word is probably tolerant, of high consumption of alcoholic beverages. It just won't allow me to do it. As we all know, alcohol turns a lot of things off. It makes you feel good in one sense, yet when it comes to your awareness, your ability to stay in the present moment, when it comes to any kind of intuition, it's all turned off. You are disconnected from that part of yourself. And in my mind, I wanted to believe, as part of a higher calling, that Mother Ayahuasca herself, my soul, my superconscious, It came to me and said, you don't need alcohol in your life anymore. And to the extent that your ego and your mind still wants you to drink, will actually have your body reject as much. It's a great story, isn't it? We like to tell ourselves great stories, the ones that make us feel noble and enlightened and empowered. My friend pointed out to me that a number of people that he was acquainted with, not only professionally but personally, were unable to consume alcohol at all if to the extent that they could have one or two drinks, that was it, after they had contracted the coronavirus. Not in an accusatory tone, but in an inquisitive tone. He asked, did you not have COVID immediately after you went to Costa Rica? And I corrected him and I said, no, I had COVID while I was in Costa Rica, such that it required me to stay in the country for another 9-10 days. I don't have the constitution for alcohol anymore. I don't even think that I could try to build my tolerance up to alcohol. I get to a point and it just doesn't taste good anymore. It just won't go down easy anymore. Certainly that can be attributed to age. I never had the disdain for alcohol where it didn't actually taste good after a certain point, after a certain amount of consumption. Now my ego does not like this at all. In fact, my ego was quite disappointed as I came to this realization. Yet, coincidentally, at the same time, this higher self was quite pleased with the whole arrangement. Can you stay present in the moment? Can you be aware? Can you actually listen to that thing that we all call intuition or synchronicity? Well, dummy, when you're boozing, you can't. So while this piece was actually going to be about how coronavirus may have contributed to the fact that I can't drink anymore, I actually looked at it from below instead of above, instead of from my ego, and perhaps this is a side effect of the coronavirus that's actually to my benefit, not my detriment. I mean, if the universe is sending you signals that you shouldn't be drinking as much for years and years and years, and of course in your ego you say, fuck that, I love alcohol, it's delicious, which, by the way, it is. Okay then, how about I hit you with this pandemic virus and it absolutely destroys your capacity to enjoy alcohol beyond a certain point. Oh, universe, you clever son of a bitch.
Act 2, Music, EDM and Community.
I was actually in my car. It was a 1987 Buick Skylark. Piece of shit. In that automobile, they had these things called radios. On that radio, they would play these things called songs. Songs were made by these things called bands. The band that was being played on the radio while I was in my car was Alice in Chains. And the song was called Them Bones. I had a couple of buddies in that automobile. At the conclusion of that song, we all looked at each other. We were going to buy that album. But a few years later, I was actually sitting on a couch with another buddy of mine in my apartment. And we were watching the music television. Now, if you were a younger listener, and I know that I probably have 2 younger listeners, maybe 3. If you were a younger listener, the music television used to be worth a damn. The music television was actually akin to what you would have in Spotify or Pandora or any of these other mediums today. You actually were turned on to new music through the music television. On MTV, they would play these things called videos. These things called videos were musical movies whereby bands would promote the songs that they wrote and produced, and then you would be able to hear them via this video. On that musical television could be a plethora, a panoply, if you will, of different types of music. I sat there with my buddy on the couch as one Pantera came onto the television set with a song called Walk. We both looked at each other and said, we are going to get that album. But a couple of years later, I was going to a party with some friends of mine, and we picked up on these girls who were in a sorority, and a couple of the guys in our group knew them. We ended up going to this house party. Driving to the house party, I am in the car with this girl. My buddy is behind me. He starts honking his horn and flashing his lights. And this girl says, "What the hell is going on? What is wrong with him?" I was young. I was stupid. I was out of touch with spirituality, with the universe, with God. And yet, that power, that infinite wisdom spoke to me and inspired me. And I just knew, you have to change, Patrick, the radio station from whatever terrible top 40 crap was on at the time and change it to XL 102. For our younger listeners, there used to be a radio station dial whereby you would go on the FM dial from 88.1 to 106.7. These numbers represented frequencies, and on these frequencies were radio stations, and radio stations would play songs. And the song that was being played on one XL 102 was Bulls on Parade by Rage Against the Machine. 30, 40 seconds into the song, this girl started to talk. She didn't have any interest whatsoever in this song. And I calmly and respectfully said, "Shut the fuck up until this plays out." After we stopped the car at the house to go into the party, my buddy and I looked at each other and said, "We will go out and we will buy this album." Yes, dear listener, yes, she was upset with me. And yes, dear listener, yes, because we were so young, I was able to talk my way back into her good graces. Why do I regale you with such tales? In my mind, my upbringing, the musical influences I had were magical. It was a magical time to be a late teen, early 20s single man in the United States of America. The music was amazing. It was pioneering. And it created a sense of community with so many people that I not only knew, but people that I didn't know, that just by way of the fandom of this music, you had yourself a new friend. There's nothing like that feeling of community, particularly when you feel like you're part of something that's pioneering, that's cutting edge, that's on the zenith of cool. Occasionally on this podcast, I talk about separation. I talk about how others consciously and unconsciously create this separation. I often talk about how I create this separation. As someone who is older, one of the ways that I create separation is by calling people who are in their late teens and early 20s kids. I can't remember being called a kid back when I was a kid. I have no doubt that being called a kid is at best jestful teasing and at worst outright antagonism. One thing kids don't want to be called is kids. I don't understand the EDM, and I don't understand the kids' affinity for the EDM. In this very podcast, I will call kids who like EDM kids who like EDM in a way that is often, at best, jestful teasing. Though it very likely comes off to them, to the extent that anyone under the age of 30 is listening to this, as outright antagonism. I am creating separation. I didn't think my parents were cool. I'm pretty sure that I'm right about that on the cool meter, being held in that ethereal place in another dimension. I mean, we all talk about judgment when it comes to the afterlife and being judged on the things that we've done. Is it possible that we're going to be judged on the things that we liked and disliked? Because if so, I'm doing pretty well. I've rejected EDM, top 40 music, Walmart and McDonald's. I was in on Tool and Morphine and Radiohead really early on. I can't say that my first Pantera album was Cowboys from Hell, but it was certainly my second. I bought it along with Vulgar Display of Power. I've got a pretty good resume. Yet one of the things that is often ignored, I am often ignoring it, is the sense of community that's created through your affinity for certain types of things, primarily music, primarily art and culture. Books fall into that category, so do movies, so does food. But music, it has a special place in our lives. I was recently educated to the fact that when you talk about the EDM, if you mention glow sticks, you are an old. You are identifying yourself as an old if you mention with the EDM the glow sticks. Only an old calls the glowy sticks that the kids use when bouncing around to the EDM glow sticks. I did not know this. I am an old. If I go out and listen to the EDM, I can't tell you artist A from artist B from artist C. I can't tell you within what you'd call the umbrella of electronic dance music, genre A from genre B from genre C. EDM as a whole has a huge following, a huge community, and each genre has a huge following, a huge community. Ask my parents today the difference between classic rock and metal and thrash metal and grunge, and they couldn't tell you the difference. You could play 4 songs from each genre. They couldn't tell you the difference. Granted, now getting back into my ego and judgment, boomers thought they were really cool because they were affiliated at some point with the counterculture. They're just not. The boomers were too easily swayed in the 80s by that top 40. See, there it is again. Me, in my ego, pushing out, creating separation from the generation that preceded me and the generations that have come after me. What is the point of all of this? It's all about community. Music can create a very unique type of community. And what I should be doing, what I believe we should all be doing, is embracing as much, even if we don't understand the music, even if we don't understand the culture, even if we don't understand how those glowy sticks are not called glow sticks anymore. What I should be celebrating, what we should all be celebrating, is that there is a place where people can come together. And evidently, there are people of all ages, particularly with electronic dance music, forming a community, a place where there is no separation and judgment. I don't get it. I don't get the music. Yet I do get going to a concert and seeing so many different types of people and seeing how much the music created a community such that before and after the show, you can go and talk to people that you otherwise would never speak to, don't have much in common with, and speak passionately and meaningfully about one thing: the artist, the band, the songs, the concert. As I stated in a previous podcast segment, I'm trying to reserve my judgment for anything that I am exposed to from the popular culture media. I don't want to continue in this podcast, I don't want to continue in my life to make decisions about how I think about things, how I feel about things, based on what I see from the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, ABC, NBC, CBS. And in that same vein, in that same vibration, that same frequency, I don't want to continue to create separation between me and people younger than me and the things that they like, namely the music. Not everyone is going to be in resonance with the bending of the F chord on an electric guitar. Not everyone enjoys a fine filet mignon cutlet coupled with an elegant Napa Valley wine. As a testament to that, you see the signs on the McDonald's, billions and billions served. Who am I, though, to judge their community? I am and I will celebrate that the community exists in the first place, because it is in opposite to the separation that I have been so lamenting here on this podcast. Does that mean standing in line to wait on the hostess to take me to a table in any bar or restaurant in Scottsdale, Arizona? I'm going to start bouncing up and down because that's all they play in any establishment here in the Dale. EDM. I think you know the answer. Will I sit in judgment of all of the people in my immediate vicinity who are nodding heads, swaying hips, and bouncing up and down? No. No, I will not. I will let them bask in the flow, in the resonance of that community.
Act 3. Dan Snyder is an evil genius.
I have personally criticized Dan Snyder, the owner of the Washington Commanders, the Washington football team, numerous times. I have been quoted and am proud to have made the statement that if it were reported that Dan Snyder sacrifices puppies to the altar of greed in the Washington Post tomorrow, no one would bat an eye. No one would question the validity of it. We would all believe it because it seems so in character with who Dan Snyder is. Well, Dan Snyder did, in fact, sacrifice puppies to the altar of greed. Those puppies just happened to be high-level NFL league executives, the commissioner Roger Goodell himself, his fellow owners, and their high-level staff. If Dan Snyder was in House of Cards or Game of Thrones or Mad Men, he'd be the winner. He'd be the one who wins. You'd hate the character. You'd hate the ending. And yet you'd know this is more accurate. This is more likely what would happen in real life than any Hollywood or storybook ending. It is almost cartoonish in its actualization, but Dan Snyder is that evil genius that you see in television and movies. Dan Snyder didn't become a billionaire by being a nice guy. He is a ruthless, he is a calculated, he is a paranoid prick. And this is a combination of traits that is often necessary in order to garner, to amass the kind of wealth that the man compiled over the course of years, providing him the leverage to become the youngest owner in NFL history, at least at the time that he bought the franchise. The Washington City paper, years ago, well before all of the mountain of evidence we have now against Dan Snyder existed, the Washington City paper did an expose of Dan Snyder, and the guy who wrote the article, his name is escaping me. I should look it up. I'm not going to do it. Editor's note, that journalist's name is Dave McKenna. Dan Snyder hired a private investigator to tail this guy and ended up suing him and the newspaper. Dan Snyder, over the years, has used private investigators in the different suits that he's faced. It is not a stretch of the imagination to believe that, as it has been reported by ESPN today, October the 13th of the year of our Lord, 2022, that Dan Snyder has used private investigators through the law firm that he hired to tail Roger Goodell, NFL executives, and other NFL owners. When you live in a den of thieves, you know very well that you can't trust anyone. But what's more, you know that in order to stay in that den of thieves, you need to have dirt on every one of the other thieves. Dan Snyder, you are a genius. Do you remember who Elliot Spitzer is? Elliot Spitzer was a district attorney. He ended up being the district attorney in the Southern District of New York, one of the most powerful district attorney offices in the nation. He was going to go after the banking industry. It is very well known on Wall Street that if you want to bring anyone down in high-powered circles within New York City, that's finance, that's politics, that's even religion. You start with prostitution. That's right. Some of the highest class, some of the highest paid prostitutes on planet Earth are in New York City and have some of the most sophisticated, well-known, high-profile clientele in all of the world. The powers that be wanted to take Spitzer down. They did so by getting dirt on him, and what did they do? They found the prostitute that he had been frequenting. Legal career ruined. Political career ruined. As we know, as consumers of the National Football League product, the owners are some of the most untrustworthy, nefarious people that you could ever come across. And there's only 32 of them. It's not that hard to find 8, 10, 12 nefarious actors that you can follow, that you can get dirt on, and change the complexion of any vote that's being taken by the NFL ownership. Do I believe that Dan had private investigators follow Roger Goodell, other NFL executives, other NFL owners, other senior executives in NFL franchises? Of course I do. Do I believe that that information is damning enough that it has allowed Snyder to stay in his position of control? Of course I do. One of the things that I love most about this story, if it's all true, and I have to put that asterisk on there, and I am going to do the flip. I am going to look at this from below instead of above, because I'm certainly in my judgment right now. One of the things I love most about this story is that after having been asked about this, an NFL owner going on and on, what was that owner's biggest concern? What was the blight that was Dan Snyder to the league? It wasn't the sexual harassment. It wasn't the toxic work culture. It's the fact that that franchise has become such a joke that it is now a financial liability. It's that Snyder has so pissed off everyone in Maryland, Washington, D.C., and Virginia that he can't get a stadium deal done. Den of thieves. It's all about the money. And when you're dealing with 31 other people that are only about the money, you're definitely going to be able to get dirt on them. My favorite quote of the entire ESPN piece: if Dan Snyder was able to get a new stadium deal done, would all be forgiven? One word: yes. Yes, dear listener. It's that type of attitude, it's that type of mentality that's allowed Dan Snyder to stay in the National Football League for as long as he has. And I applaud the man. He knows the environment that he is in. He is who he is. The other 31 owners are who they are. Roger Goodell is who he is. Den of thieves. This whole public perception about the NFL and the Shield and all that it stands for, it's all bullshit. Dan Snyder knows it. It's all about dollars and cents, and he isn't going to compromise any of his dollars or any of his cents because the morality police, who are just a bunch of Johnny-come-latelys, by the way, are going to try to take his franchise. And that brings me to the flip side. That brings me to looking at this from below, not above, getting out of my ego. Is it possible that this entire story is bullshit? Of course it is. Why? Because the owners are now prepping the public. They're now prepping the media for an overture against Dan Snyder. They're going to try to vote him out. They're going to try to get him to sell the team. And the methodology, which I believe is actually pretty smart, is, hey, we have a rule against how much debt that any one owner can have, and you've got a lot because you had to go and borrow money, Dan Snyder, to buy out all your partners, all those minority owners. And you had to do that, by the way, because they were all oscillating for you to give up your control of the team because you had driven it so far into the ground. So your only option was to borrow money, buy them out, and have exclusive control over the team. Well, we're not going to allow you to take on any more debt to build a new stadium. We want a new owner to take over the team. We want new blood, and we want new relationships so that we can get the best stadium deal. And the best stadium deal in NFL parlance means we can get the most public money. We can get the government to basically fund the construction of an NFL stadium for a private owner. We want that all to happen post-haste, and the only way it will is if Dan Snyder is no longer the owner of the team. So this story may have been strategically planted to pave the way for a vote, and I believe the NFL owners are meeting next Tuesday to pave the way for a vote to kick Danny Boy out of the league. The Commanders are an absolute joke on the field, if not for Dan, if not for his complete and total lack of integrity when it comes to how to operate, how to own an NFL franchise, and the nefarious, the dubious, the paranoid things that he does. It wouldn't even be fun to talk about this team. To recap, yes, I believe that Dan Snyder has hired private investigators to follow around key league executives and other owners, to rifle through old files and records, to investigate old business deals, to generally dig up dirt on them. Yes, I also, because I have so routinely had to backtrack to correct myself, yes, I also believe it's very possible that because so many owners want Danny out, that Snyder has been besmirched, if that's even possible, that he never did any of the things that he's accused of doing in this new ESPN piece, and it's just to posture. It's just league and other owners posturing to get Danny Boy out. But, and I use that word intentionally, but I actually hope it's the former, not the latter. I hope that Snyder has that dossier on a number of key people, because Snyder is the guy that's going to burn the whole thing to the ground. Snyder is very much in the same mindset, the same vibration, the same frequency as Vladimir Putin. He's scared, he's paranoid, and his actions are driven by fear. Putin, I believe, is still a rational enough actor and has influences around him that he will not escalate a war such that it turns into World War III. Football, on the other hand, is not life or death. And the 32 owners, being as petty and as money-grubbing, money-driven as they are, well, they will push because the dollar is king in the NFL. They are going to push and push and push until Snyder is out. They can get a new stadium for the Commanders, and they get those revenues back up because it's all about the money. I believe that Dan Snyder understands as much, and it's going to be over his dead body, and if there have to be other dead bodies created as a result, so be it. Like Nero with his lute standing over the burning Rome, I welcome the spectacle.
Act 4. A fanboy moment for the University of Tennessee football team.
My fandom has certainly waned over the course of the last 2 years, particularly the last year, and I haven't done a fanboy piece about one of my teams in a while. Even the New York Metropolitans that won 101 games this season, I really didn't do any fanboy pieces about it. Now, that wasn't because that I was worried that they were going to somehow blow something, even though their early exit from the playoffs was disappointing. This is a new experience for that baseball team, winning and winning consistently. I am very optimistic about the future of the New York Metropolitans. I just didn't feel compelled to do a fanboy segment. I do feel compelled to do a fanboy segment about the University of Tennessee volunteer football team. This weekend, actually the day that I'm going to publish this podcast, the University of Tennessee football team will host the University of Alabama Crimson Tide. Alabama being ranked number 3, Tennessee being ranked number 6 in the nation. It has been decades since the University of Tennessee has fielded a football team that warranted such a ranking. When the University of Tennessee football team was capable of warranting such a ranking, it was coached by one Philip Fulmer. After having lost some of those contests, one Peyton Manning led the University of Tennessee to a victory, and Tennessee ran off a string of victories against the University of Alabama when the University of Alabama was having its downturn in the program. Well, under Nick Saban, they certainly aren't in a downturn. Being that the game is in Knoxville, Tennessee, and being that these Nick Saban football teams have been susceptible to spread offenses that actually like to push the pace of gameplay, that run up to the line of scrimmage and run a lot of plays, I'm actually optimistic about Tennessee's chances against that Goliath that is the University of Alabama. Optimism. What is both the healing elixir and the poison pill of any sports fan. It brings great hope. It brings great disappointment. Now that Fanboy has spoken, been able to stand up at the head of the table and root on his University of Tennessee Volunteers, I'm likely compelled to come back next week and give the aftermath of that football game. My hope against hopes is that I'm still capable of watching the very game during the third and fourth quarter, that it's still a competitive contest, and that, yes, the University of Tennessee still has hope to win the game. This is Why Don't Vote, a podcast.